So my next question about measurable goals and benchmarks is, what do you think, as a behaviorist, are the three most important things that IEP teams have to think about when they work on developing goals, like real big takeaways for those team members?
Okay, it's a great question. I think I'm going to go back to something we talked about briefly already in my first answer. I think this issue of relevance is so crucial for kids, and I think, we probably all seen the student who's working for like the 6th year on tying their shoes, right? And at some point you have to say, okay, this would be a great skill for this student to have, but really, how much time, energy, and effort are we going to spend on this skill, and how important is it really? Let's go get some sneakers with some Velcro ties, and move on to another area that's going to benefit this student, much more significantly in time. So is it a relevant goal? Is this goal really going to enhance either the student's academic life, or is it going to enhance their social life or their employability? How does this goal, relate to the rest of the student's life, and is it really an important goal? Because again, the time is limited, right? And so what are the things that we're really going to target, to try to enhance this student's life and make sure that he or she gets whatever we are able to offer in an optimal way. And so I think, again, relevance is a really, really important thing for teams to think about in developing goals.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that the relevance could change over time. Like you might start with, wow, this child is, in first grade or second grade, and we're going to work on the shoe time, and we're going to work on the math calculation,
Absolutely.
and we're going to work on
Absolutely.
the decoding
Right.
and reading fluency.
Right.
But then as that child kind of goes through elementary school, then we can't find an intervention that allows for, visible progress, that we might move on to asking the question, how could we accommodate, or are there accommodations that we could, and then set goals about the student's ability to accommodate, like using the Velcro straps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense, right, that goals would change over time, and that the idea is, that the things you're working on in elementary school are not going to be the things you're working on in middle school and high school, although the categories may remain similar, right? But certainly, and especially as students get older, we want to start thinking about transition, about life after high school, what's that going to look like, and how do we equip students for that as well. So.
Well, and even if the priority doesn't change, right? If we still care that this kid can
read,
be independent,
right.
or read,
Right.
or calculate, right?
Right.
It's the vehicle that changes to get to that goal.
Right. Right, yeah, I agree.
Nice, I like it.
And the second thing I think is important for teams to think about is, even as the goal is being designed, thinking, okay, this is our goal, this is what we think is important. I think right at the start we have to think about how are we going to collect data. So how are we going to actually get reliable data on this, so that it's measured, so the measurability comes through, so we have a really reliable measure and outcome set of data that says, yes, we're making progress, we're getting this done, we're able to teach this skill, and here's how we show that, here's how we measure. So, how are we going to collect data, and who's going to collect data, and what kind of system, and because again, the time for data collection is very limited. Sometimes there's paraprofessionals, sometimes there's not. How are we going to help students by making sure that we're getting a really good sense of what is working for them. I think often we rely on kind of our just kind of subjective sense of how things are going, and I think that has some value, but I also know that when you sit down and actually look at the data sometimes, it often turns out, wow, our sense wasn't really on track,
Right.
And so I think it's important that we know about data collection and how we're going to collect data for something as we go into making it. So.
Have you seen any technology or uses of technology? Like, do you use, video or online resources that kind of embed the data collection? Have you seen anything that's kind of really effective?
There's all sorts of stuff like that out there. I think for most data collection in a school setting, it's overkill, and it requires more time, for the people collecting the data to use it than it would just to have a much more simple sort of data collection system. But certainly, for high stakes behaviors, for kids in behavioral and socio-emotional programs, where there's a lot of data collection on a lot of different things, something like that, There's all sorts of apps for the iPad, for instance. There's lots of different things, and the advantages, if you do use that, is sometimes those things include things like the app will graph the data for you, and it's really, really nice to have that data in visual format. So that's one of the things that really helps the data to stand out if you can see it, you know, and graphing data takes a lot of time if you're doing manually. As behavior analysts, we do a lot of that anyway because it's so, you know, it is so important to be able to see, you know, trend lines and things like that. But sometimes the apps will actually do that work for you, which is really nice. But for most data that for the kids that we're talking about, it's not going to be, at least not yet. Again, we may get there, but there's nothing right now that schools are using routinely, you know, from a technology point of view that makes that any easier.
So interestingly, you also mentioned it's not just the collection of data that we care about in terms of measurability, but it's the analysis of data.
Oh, and you know, and that's huge, obviously, and you know, again, it goes back to time. Who has the time to do that, right? But you know, certainly, you know, as we're looking at the effectiveness of our intervention, as we're looking at planning for the next round of goals, you know, it's crucial that we spend time with the data and that someone is taking a really clear look at, okay, here's what we've got and what does it mean, you know, and then how do we use that to plan our next series of interventions.
Well, and that's interesting because it sounds like what you're saying is that that's all part of writing measurable goals, like thinking about not just what is the data that's going to show us whether the change that we're hoping for is happening, but who's going to look at the data, who's going to collect the data, who's going to look at the data, who's going to share the data in a way that it is understandable to every member of the team.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, and again, I think that's I think mostly for time reasons. That's one of the areas in public schools that is so hard for us usually. You know, is to find the windows, you know, to do that work, and so, but I do think it's crucial.
Or coming up with strategies that are workable within the realities of a public school become really important. And maybe we need, as schools and as team leaders, to spend a little more time and thought on that, because that will give us big results.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, in some cases, you know, when kids have a behavior analyst associated with their team, you know, it becomes easier because that's the job of that person. You know, but for most kids, they don't have that, you know, built in. You know, sort of person who has that kind of charge as what they do, you know, and so it's harder. But I do think you're right that it's an important innovation.
Cool. And is there a third thing that you think is important?
You know, the third thing I thought was important is in writing these measurable goals is I think it's really important to get the perspective of all of the team members about what's important. You know, and I think what comes to mind always for me is that you know, parents often get kind of left out in this goal development thing, and so I think, you know, parents are you know, both the ones who kind of know their kids the best of all the team members, but also have kind of a long-term stake in outcomes. Not that as professionals we're not trying to do the best we can for these kids, but parents are certainly invested in a different way in the success of their children. And so I do think making sure that we're leveraging the insight and the prioritization that all the team members bring to this goal setting process. So it's not just, you know, teachers sitting around a table saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what's important, but also, hey, you know, mom and dad, what do you think about this? Is this your goal? You know, is there something else that you want to work on? You know, what would make your life with your student, you know, flow more smoothly, or would enhance your experience, you know, in supporting your son or daughter. So I think it's important to reach out to all the members of the team in designing these goals. So. Right,
that's actually a really great reminder too, that the team is made up of all different players, and that if we only reach out to some of the players, it's difficult to write a goal that's going to be relevant, right? Or meaningful, or perhaps even accepted by a parent. So, great.